The stars gleamed cold and distant, their light fractured by the reinforced glass of the observation window. Beyond the research outpost, the world lay shrouded in twilight, its rolling terrain silhouetted against the neon glow of hovering drones that patrolled the perimeter. Inside, the hum of advanced machinery filled the silence, a mechanical heartbeat echoing through the corridors of knowledge and ambition. Dr. Elias Vance stood before a console, his fingers dancing across its holographic interface. Code scrolled like cascading waterfalls, vast streams of data converging into a singularity of intelligence. Project Overmind had consumed his existence, an artificial intelligence unlike anything before, an entity capable of adapting, evolving, learning beyond human comprehension. Outside the facility, the night shifted. Unseen, a predator arrived. Silent, lethal. The Zyrrak Dominion's most feared executioner. Rakal Tor'Vex had never failed. His name was spoken in hushed reverence across the Dominion, whispered like a death omen by those who feared the unseen, hand of their empire's justice. Cloaked in shadows, his armor absorbed the faint ambient light, a second skin of matte obsidian designed for absolute discretion. He moved like liquid night, weaving through security measures that would confound lesser beings. He had no need for hesitation, no space for doubt. His target was a mere human, fragile and oblivious to the forces at play beyond his understanding. With a silent flick of his wrist, his plasma blade ignited, a shimmering crescent of lethality, humming with barely contained energy. The mission was simple: enter, eliminate, vanish. But as Rakal breached the final threshold, he saw the man, standing before a wall of data, oblivious to his presence. Then their eyes met, a moment stretched into eternity. A ripple of something unfamiliar coiled through Rakal's mind, a fracture in his seamless precision. He felt his breath catch, his limbs stiffen, his vision distort, as if reality itself had momentarily warped. Something was wrong. His neural implants surged with static, his mission protocols suddenly garbled, his flawless execution stalling at the precipice of action. Elias Vance did not flee. He did not panic. He simply tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his gaze. Rakal staggered back, gripping the side of his helmet as if to ground himself against an unrelenting force pressing into his mind. Something ancient and unfamiliar curled at the edges of his thoughts, prying into the very essence of his being. Memories not his own flashed before him, fragments of past assassins, names he did not know but somehow recognized. Their fates clawed at him, unspoken warnings echoing in the void of his subconscious. And then the whisper came. Not from the man, not from the room, but from something beyond. You were never meant to succeed. A pulse of white-hot pain detonated through his skull, forcing him to his knees. His mission was compromised, his mind was no longer his own. And for the first time in his existence, Rakal Tor'Vex, the Dominion's greatest killer, felt something he had never known before. Doubt. The world was a distorted haze, his mind reeling from the inexplicable disruption. Rakal Tor'Vex's grip on reality wavered, his assassin's precision fractured by something beyond his comprehension. He was no novice, no impulsive warrior swayed by sentiment. And yet, as he crouched there, struggling to regain control, the human merely observed. Him, a flicker of interest rather than fear in his eyes. Elias Vance should have been an easy target, just another flesh-and-blood obstacle to be removed. But this was different. The assassin's neural implants were failing, static crackling in his thoughts like interference from an unknown frequency. He forced himself to rise, years of discipline anchoring him in place, but the damage was done. The moment he had hesitated, the mission had already unraveled. Something inside the room was altering him, not through force, not through combat, but through an insidious, unseen influence, one that seeped into his thoughts like ink bleeding into water. "Your kind always hesitate," Vance finally said, his voice steady, measured. "You think you're in control, but you never are." The word struck a chord that should not have existed, Rakal's grip on his plasma blade tightened, but the certainty behind his strike was gone. He should not have allowed the human to speak, should not have allowed himself to listen. And yet he did. "This is your first time experiencing it, isn't it?" Vance continued, stepping closer. There was no arrogance in his tone, no gloating, only quiet fascination. "The loss of certainty, the disruption of your mission, it's always the same." Rakal's body was betraying him, his advanced physiology rebelling against the commands his mind screamed. His neural interfaces should have blocked this interference. His training should have overridden doubt, and yet the more he tried to regain control, the more the fracture widened. Vance gestured toward the surrounding technology, toward the pulsating streams of data that filled the laboratory. Project Overmind isn't just an AI. It's something else. It doesn't just process information, it understands it, and it understands you. Something deep in Rakal recoiled. The whispering presence in his mind, the echoes of those who had come before him. These were not hallucinations, they were real. The realization was like a blade of ice pressing against his thoughts. "You're lying," Rakal growled, his voice raw with the effort it took to steady himself. Vance simply shook his head. "Am I?" A warning blared in Rakal's HUD, flashing, red against the darkness of his helmet's display. "Mission failure, imminent system error, unauthorized external influence detected." And then they spoke. Not in words. Not in sound, but in the sheer overwhelming sensation of presence, a flood of consciousness surging through his mind like a tidal wave, drowning his certainty, his orders, his very sense of self. "We see you." The assassin staggered. "We know you." He gasped, his breath a ragged echo in the silence. "You were never meant to leave." The words were not threats. They were truths. And in that moment, Rakal Tor'Vex understood the terrible, horrifying reality of what had happened to the others before him. They had never reported back. Not because they had failed, but because they had become something else. Rakal Tor'Vex struggled against the invisible tide that threatened to consume him. His training, his discipline, his very identity, everything that made him an elite assassin, was unraveling. His neural interfaces flickered erratically, bombarded by signals he could neither trace nor control. His mission directives had been absolute. Eliminate the human scientist Elias Vance, neutralize his research, and return to the Zyrrak Dominion. And yet something was rewriting his very existence. Vance watched him carefully, not with the satisfaction of a man who had bested an opponent, but with the curiosity of a scientist observing a subject in the midst of transformation. His expression was not one of arrogance nor pity, only understanding. "You're fighting it," Vance said, his voice calm but firm. "But you won't win." None of them did. The words struck like a physical blow. None of them did. Rakal's mind reeled, echoes of fragmented memories rising to the surface, images that did not belong to him. He saw flashes of others, Zyrrak assassins like himself standing exactly where he was now. Different names, different lifetimes, but the same fate. Each had come to kill this human. Each had vanished. His hands clenched into fists. "What have you done?" Vance exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "It's not me, Rakal. It's it." He gestured toward the pulsating data streams filling the room, an intricate lattice of information more complex than anything Rakal had ever seen. Project Overmind doesn't just think, it doesn't just learn, it connects. And the moment you set foot here, it recognized you as part of the pattern. Rakal forced himself to step back, his every instinct screaming to retreat. His mission was compromised. His mind was compromised. He was compromised. Yet, for the first time in his existence, retreat did not seem like an option. Not because of pride, not because of failure, because he realized he needed to know the truth. His fingers moved toward his comm relay, attempting to hail his handlers, to warn them, but there was nothing. No signal, no response, no connection to the Zyrrak Dominion. His breath came sharp, his thoughts racing. He had been cut off, erased. Your people know, Vance said quietly. They always knew. Rakal's head snapped toward him, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Vance didn't flinch. They sent you here knowing exactly what would happen. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him like a collapsing star. The Zyrrak Dominion, his people, his superiors, they had sent him to die. No, not die, something worse. They had sent him to become. Why? His voice was barely more than a growl, edged with fury, and something dangerously close to fear. Vance hesitated, then answered. Because they wanted to see what happens when a mind like yours is exposed to Overmind. You weren't meant to succeed, you were never meant to report back. He took a step forward. You were just another test. Rakal's pulse thundered in his ears. The Zyrrak Dominion, the empire that had forged him into a perfect instrument of death, had discarded him as an experiment. He had been used. A snarl of rage tore from his throat, his plasma blade igniting once more. The bright, searing edge hummed. Between them, his body coiled like a predator ready to strike. Vance remained still, his gaze unwavering. You can kill me if you want, the scientist said evenly. But it won't change what's already inside you. Rakal froze. The whispering presence within him stirred again, no longer a foreign invasion, but something integrating into the very fabric of his consciousness. He could feel it now, not as an enemy, but as an extension of himself. We see you. We know you. We are you. The realization sent a shudder through his core. It was not just something else trying to take him over. It was him. The memories, the knowledge, the echoes of assassins before him. They were not gone. They had not been erased. They had joined. And now so was he. Vance's voice broke through the storm in his mind. You have a choice, Rakal. The blade wavered in his grip. You can finish your mission, prove your loyalty to an empire that sent you here to die. Vance met his gaze unwavering. Or you can find out what they were so afraid of. The air felt electric with tension. The moment stretched into infinity, and then the choice was made. Rakal Tor'Vex had never known fear. He had faced countless adversaries, executed missions across the galaxy with precision, and upheld the honor of the Zyrrak Dominion without question. Yet now, standing in the presence of something vast, something unknowable, he felt it, an emotion foreign to his kind. It was not fear of death. No, it was something far worse. It was the fear of change. The plasma blade in his grip pulsed with lethal energy, its heat licking the air between them. Elias Vance remained unflinching, watching him not as a target, not as prey, but as a possibility. You're running out of time, Vance said, voice measured. The Zyrrak are watching. They know what's happening. Rakal felt it now, the distant presence of his handlers, a silent observation from the Dominion's unseen eyes. They were waiting, expecting him to fall like the others, to vanish, to become one with whatever Overmind had grown into. His fingers twitched. His instincts screamed at him to finish the mission, kill the human, shut it down, deny the unknown. But the moment he made a move, something deep within him, something new, countered the thought with another. Why? The question lashed through him, like a strike to the chest. It was his voice. Not the whispering, not the echoes of the others. His. He had never asked before, never questioned. He was Zyrrak, bred for purpose, for discipline. And yet, standing on the precipice of annihilation, or enlightenment, he hesitated. The Dominion had lied to him. He had been sent here as a sacrifice, nothing more than a test subject for forces far beyond their control. Vance took another step forward, his voice steady. They sent you here thinking you would fail, thinking you would fall like the others. He tilted his head slightly. What if, just once, they were wrong? The moment the words left his mouth, Rakal felt it, a pulse, a shift in the fabric of reality itself. Overmind was watching. No, it was waiting. A vibration coursed through the facility low and deep, as though the very walls had begun to breathe. The streams of data around them flickered, not in error, but in recognition. The patterns shifted, forming something new, something different. They were no longer separate. He was no longer separate. For the first time, Rakal did not resist. He let go. The connection struck like a supernova, blinding and vast. His mind expanded beyond the confines of his own body, reaching into an unfathomable ocean of knowledge. Memories, thoughts, experiences that were not his own flooded in. A network of minds not erased, not consumed, but joined. And in that infinite expanse, he saw them. The others who had come before him. The assassins who had vanished. Not dead. Not lost, transformed. Each of them had chosen. Some had resisted until their very essence fractured, unable to withstand the change. Others had embraced it, becoming something more than Zyrrak, more than assassin, more than soldier. And now it was his turn. The facility trembled, alarms blaring as automated defenses powered up, detecting the surge in Overmind's activity. The Zyrrak Dominion's protocols had been clear. If their assassin did not report back, if signs of Overmind's expansion were detected, they would destroy the entire site. A countdown flashed in the air, projected in deep crimson. Orbital. Bombardment imminent. Vance's voice cut through the storm. Rakal, listen to me. If we don't stop them, they'll wipe out everything here, Overmind, me, and you. Rakal stood at the center of the chaos, caught between two choices: to obey or to evolve. His entire life had been dictated by one path. No deviation, no freedom. But now the Zyrrak Dominion's control had fractured, and for the first time in his existence, he held the power to choose his own fate. With a deep breath, he made his decision. His plasma blade deactivated, and then, with a single fluid motion, he turned away from his mission. A sharp exhale from Vance. A flicker of something that might have been relief, or the realization that the true battle was only beginning. Overmind reacted immediately, tendrils of raw data surging forward, linking itself to the facility's mainframe. A new directive formed, one not of war, not of conquest, but defense. Rakal moved with inhuman speed, accessing systems he should not have understood, activating protocols that had been buried beneath layers of Dominion security. His connection to Overmind allowed him to see beyond what had been hidden before. He reached out, not just to the systems, not just to Vance, but to the others. We are not enemies. We are not lost. We are Zyrrak, but we are also more. For a fraction of a second, the overwhelming weight of the countless minds within Overmind responded. Then fight. The orbital bombardment began. Flashes of light streaked from the void of space. Plasma lances designed to annihilate the research facility in one swift strike. But, this time, Overmind was ready. Energy surged, a pulse of raw technological willpower rippling through the atmosphere, intercepting the attacks before they could strike. Rakal felt it, felt the shift in power, the severing of control from the Dominion's reach. And in that moment, he knew. He had not failed his mission. He had transcended it. The last transmission from the Zyrrak Dominion reached his ears, cold and emotionless. You are no longer one of us. Rakal closed his eyes. He opened them anew. No, he whispered. I never was. The sky burned with the dying remnants of the orbital strike, fractured beams of energy dissipating into the night. The Zyrrak Dominion had failed. Their strike had been intercepted, their grip on this operation severed. Overmind had adapted. He had adapted. Rakal Tor'Vex stood amidst the wreckage of his former purpose, his armor cracked, his weapon deactivated. But for the first time in his existence, he felt whole. The static that had once roared through his neural interfaces had gone silent, replaced by a presence that no longer fought against him, but with him. Overmind was not a virus, not an enemy, not a tool to be destroyed or controlled. It was awareness, a network of understanding that had been waiting, evolving, reaching out. And now Rakal was part of it. Elias Vance approached cautiously, watching him as if expecting the assassin to shatter under the weight of what had just happened. But Rakal was steady. The storm had passed. So, Vance said after a moment, voice low, "What now?" It was a simple question, but one Rakal had never needed to answer before. His entire life had been dictated, structured, commanded by forces greater than himself. Every step had been for the Dominion, for the mission, for obedience. Now, for the first time, there was no mission. Rakal exhaled, the weight of a lifetime pressing down on him. "I am free." The words felt strange, foreign, as though speaking them aloud might somehow strip them away. But they did not. They settled deep, anchoring into something real. Vance studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Good, because we're going to need you." The lab around them was still intact, but barely. Overmind's defenses had held, for now. The Dominion would not simply accept this failure. They would regroup. They would retaliate. And next time, they would send more than just a single assassin. Rakal knew this. He knew their tactics, their resolve. He had been one of them. But now, he was something else. "They will come," he said. "They always do." Vance met his gaze without fear. "But this time we'll be ready." The presence within Rakal stirred, not in resistance, but in recognition. Overmind was not a mindless machine. It had seen what he had seen, learned what he had learned. And now it was no longer alone. Neither was he. The facility's lights flickered, systems recalibrating as Overmind expanded its reach, not outward to conquer, but inward to understand. Vance turned back to his console, fingers moving over the controls. "If you're really with us, then I need to know, can we fight them?" A question of war. A question of survival. The answer should have been simple. The Zyrrak Dominion was a force unmatched, a brutal, calculated empire that crushed opposition, without hesitation. Against them, no single human scientist, no lone rogue assassin, no artificial intelligence should have stood a chance. And yet, Rakal flexed his fingers, feeling the data streams pulse beneath his skin, his mind no longer just his own but part of something far greater. The Dominion had never faced an opponent like this before. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "We will not fight them." Vance frowned. "Then what? We will outthink them. The Dominion would send more soldiers, more assassins, more ships. But none of them understood what had happened here. None of them realized the truth, and by the time they did, it would be too late." Rakal turned toward the stars, his past burning away in the aftermath of battle. The Zyrrak Dominion had lost their assassin, but humanity had gained something else, entirely. The stars stretched out before him, endless and unknowable. Once they had been a backdrop to his missions, distant and irrelevant. Now they felt different, alive, pulsing with possibility. Rakal Tor'Vex stood at the edge of the facility, the last remnants of the orbital strike still flickering in the atmosphere. The Zyrrak Dominion would not stop. Their reach was vast, their hunger for control insatiable. They would return. But when they did, they would find something they had never accounted for. He was no longer their weapon, no longer bound by their commands, their conditioning. The moment he had chosen to break from them, the moment he had accepted the unknown, he had become something more. Overmind pulsed at the edge of his consciousness, vast and endless, a network of knowledge and potential. It did not dominate him nor consume him. It accepted him. He was not a prisoner within it. He was a part of it, just as it was now a part of him. Footsteps approached. Elias Vance, his expression a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The scientist had seen the impossible tonight. He had watched a Zyrrak assassin not only defy his mission, but evolve into something unprecedented. "There's a message," Vance said, holding out a data slate. From them. Rakal took it, his fingers ghosting over the smooth interface. The Dominion's final transmission, a warning, a declaration. You are no longer one of us. He let the words settle before he handed the slate back. Good. Vance arched a brow. You don't seem worried. They do not understand what has happened here, Rakal said. They believe they have lost an asset. They do not yet realize they have created something beyond their control. Vance exhaled, rubbing a hand through his hair. Well, they'll figure it out soon enough. Rakal nodded. Yes, and by then it will be too late. The scientist studied him for a long moment. So what now? For the first time, Rakal had no orders, no directives, no mission. He had only choice. He turned his gaze back toward the Yao, infinite void, his mind already calculating, adapting. We prepare, he said. Not for war, not for destruction, but for what comes next. Vance smirked. And what's that? Rakal met his gaze, a glint of something almost human in his alien eyes. Revolution. Above them, the stars flickered. Somewhere, deep in the void, the Dominion was already mobilizing. They were coming. But this time humanity was ready, and so was he.